say. You got the day on? The date? Okay. Metaphysics. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make metaphysics live in a very practical manner. I'll be doing that in a number of ways as we go through. Don't be turned off by the dryness of the beginning, although if you've got the kind of mind that is inquiring, you'll see the value of these pages. Sorry, are you right? So, a couple of preliminary remarks tonight. They arise out of things that I've said in the past. Don't be misled by some things we're talking about. Somebody said to me, where are you teaching from? What biblical perspective? I said, we're teaching philosophy, not theology. I said, that's a strange thing to ask. That came from Catholic Charities, not Catholic Charities, from the pro-life office in Buffalo. They were asked that, and they thought it was strange too. We're not talking about belief, we're talking about human reason. You remember the other night I said, for instance, God could not make a square circle. That's not saying something against God, it's saying something against square circles. In themselves, it's impossible to exist. Like I mentioned the other night, a fellow said to me once, can God make a stone too big for himself to lift? Don't chicken out as soon as you hear me say something, because it may not be intelligible to you now, but it will become so. Please remember that. Aristotle said something which St. Thomas took up. A small error in principle leads to a great error in the conclusion. That's a very far-reaching statement. A small error in principle, or in the principle if you like, or in a principle, leads to a great error in conclusion. If you've ever done any rifle shooting, as I have so much around my 20s and 30s, aiming at targets, aiming at a rabbit, a little target. I deplore what I see here, shooting deer. You could almost shoot a deer with a pop gun from, so it's a large target, but try shooting at a rabbit, especially when he's on the run. In many cases, if you are just a hairbreadth out in your aim, you'll miss the rabbit. A small error in principle leads to a great error in conclusion. The Ten Commandments, for instance, they're being pushed out of the schools. The ACLU is seeing to that. But look what's going on. You can expect daily now shootings. Years ago when there were some shootings, I was at Niagara University. I said to Mrs. Katerina, our receptionist at the time, I said when something was on, some shooting was on, I said, we're going to see a lot more of that, Mrs. Katerina. She said, oh, do you think so? Yes, I do think so. And by heaven, how many have we seen since? Every few days now we're seeing multiple shootings. You can't take away principles and expect kids to live by them. You can't take the commandments away and still expect the kids to live by them. In the economic order, principles have been forgotten. One principle, for instance, every being operates for the sake of an end. There's a conference being organized between 3 or 4 national organizations, and I've been asked to chair that conference in St. Louis, Missouri in next August. And I hear a president who is well known nationally and internationally. He's speaking about capitalism. We've got to get rid of capitalism, he says. Well, there again, he forgets the end. What is capitalism? There are two opposite things called capitalism. You may invest money to get a return. Productive investment, we call that. You may invest money to stop somebody else from getting a return. We call that anti-productive investment. I published a paper under the title of The Two Faces of Capitalism. It's quite natural to invest money to get a return. But to do something ruthless, to stop somebody else from earning their living, that is gravely immoral. Gravely immoral. It's against the nature of society and against the nature of man, therefore it's immoral. And the nature of man and the nature of society are the measure of the moral acts. It's got to be carefully understood. Morality comes from nature, not from will. It's the greatest error you can make in all the moral theory to say that morality comes from God's will or man's will or somebody else's will. So these people ignore the end for which you invest the money. To buy a house or to buy some land, because land is going up in price. Perfectly all right. But if you go and buy it and stop somebody else from producing, earning a living, that's gravely immoral. Aristotle in his Politics mentions two occasions. Thales, I think I mentioned this, didn't I already? Thales, who invested in the presses, yes, the presses for the olives. He invested in that and stopped others from getting them. He only did it to teach them a lesson because he was not interested in economics. And they used to laugh at him because he was a philosopher. Don't we all know that, those of us that have been teaching philosophy? Even my own family, I've been, all that ridiculous stuff you're studying or you're teaching, that highfalutin nonsense, as one member of the family called it. Who wouldn't know philosophy from a dog's rear end? So, maybe I made a mistake there, maybe he does. Anyway, it reminds me once a man accused me of not belonging to he said, if Mr. Waters, this was when I was about in my 20s, I was at a meeting, a public meeting. If you'd ever been to a union meeting, etc., 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 he's saying, then I stood up and said, but I have, and sat down. The audience roared laughing. All they did was took away his condition, if I'd been to a union meeting. Anyway, but then the other man invested in the iron. Another Greek invested in iron and cornered the market for iron. He raised the price a bit and made a fortune. Aristotle declares this is one way of making money. But St. Thomas Aquinas condemns that. He said it's all right to go to the theatre and make way for others coming. But to go there and take an advantage out of the others by charging them a higher price and thereby removing some of their money unjustly, that's gravely immoral.
You can't have an investment as an end in itself, can you? I mean, if you support someone else's business, you're entitled to the return, but it has to be balanced out by the service. I mean, you still have to have a good product or a service. It has to
all that's beside the point. That's not to the question. The question is, what are you doing it for? Are you doing it to corner the market or otherwise? Look at what they're doing at the moment. They're talking in billions. That's why, as Dr. Pius and others who are famed economists, he was a medical practitioner and a philosopher and an economist, and first class with an international reputation in economics, first class in each one. As he said, 4 times as much money is spent on stopping other people from producing as is spent on producing. Big companies. Because of present company, I won't name the cola company, but I was told sorry about that, but I was told by certain people, manufacturers of drinks, how the selling of drinks in this city were cornered, how the market was cornered by stopping others from getting in to sell their drinks. So many people
in this city?
In the city of Niagara Falls.
Yeah, and they closed them up too.
Well,
Twice.
Who are?
2 different places.
There's a problem we have here, by the way. Mr. Vanari has requested that questions be kept late because this is being recorded. And I might tell you, we have distance learning going on in Sydney, Australia, and probably soon in Queensland, and in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Cleveland, Ohio, and in Toronto, and possibly in Erie, and Gannon University. I heard that some of the people were quite, in the philosophy department, were quite thrilled at the text that you've got. So I was told by one of the professors in the last few days. In any case, see, understand now, if the principle goes wrong, it'll cause chaos. Look at we're fighting in this state now, in this country now. When I say the state, I don't mean the state of New York, I mean the country. Look what we're fighting now with the inflation and all the rest of it. The English penny kept its value for 400 years, according to Dr. Pierce in his book, Value, Normal and Morbid. No inflation for 400 years. We haven't got it for 4 years, let alone 400 years. 4 years ago, the inflation figures were different from what they are now. The market's going like this. It's receiving a battering from many sources. So a small error in principle leads to a great error in conclusion. But so many people, what was it? I just received a very fine letter from Australia from my old sweetheart from my pharmacy days. She left me and became Sister Margaret Mary. I'll bring the letter in, it's funny. Anyway, she's got a wonderful sense of humour. She's a psychiatric nurse besides being a pharmacist. And, but things are happening. I lost the point I was about to make. But education today. Education. They don't know what is education. I lectured on one day a year or a semester. They had the practice students come in and had a couple of days seminars for them, and I had to speak to them, the classes there for a few years. And I said, what is education? Oh, it's all about teaching kids. Teaching them what? Teaching them to be thugs like the GPU in Canada, in Russia, NKVD, or what's the last they call the latest name for them? Pardon? What was the secret police in Russia? KGB. That's their latest name. But was that's education? Somebody studies to be an engineer or something else. Is that education? Education, you've got to understand what the end is. What the end of education is in order to do it, organize it properly. People forget that. The end is principle in practical matters. Education consists in this, the making of, these are St. Thomas's words, in the supplement, question 41, article 1. The making, education is the making of a new man right up to the state of virtue. Now, what does he mean by virtue? Oh, it's in my pocket, isn't it? Here. First of all, there are the intellectual virtues. The intellectual virtues. They're the speculative ones in which we look at reality. And there are the practical ones. There are 3 of each. The speculative ones, wisdom, science, intelligence, also called understanding. The practical ones, synderesis.
Are we in ethics or what?
Prudence, art. We're for the moment,
Are we in ethics?
we're in both ethics, philosophical psychology, and metaphysics, because we're illustrating a principle. But for the sake of completion, I'm just giving what the word virtue is, so it won't be misunderstood. This is ordinary understanding of principles. It's one of the 3 things that make up common sense. In other words, in understanding or intelligence, which is added to the intellect, in intelligence, for instance, we know this, that whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. Little kids know that. My dad, who's an electrical contractor, he used to have jokes with us when we were little kids. He'd have the tablecloth set, the tablecloth ready for dinner, and he'd have a magnet on the table. He'd make the knives and forks move around. Of course, we kids would say, "Look at that, the 2 forks moving." But we weren't that dumb. We looked under the table and saw his hand with a magnet. That's intelligence. Science, looking for causes. Wisdom, looking for ultimate causes. This consists of principles, and this consists of practical principles in the intellect. Practical principles. Principles that are more practical in the practical life. And all of these are universal understandings. But they have to be applied in the practical order. Prudence applies it. A fellow ought to be nice to his sister, except if you've got the kind of sister I've got. Who said that? So, a fellow ought to be kind to his sister. But how ought I be kind to my sister here and now? That's what prudence concerns. Prudence always concerns actions here and now. There was a famous man, the Curé of Ars. He used to be dumb in philosophical and theological theory. But in practical matters, he was first class. Sometimes you can ask a farmer. He's had little education, if any. But in practical matters, he might be first class. Not everybody's like that. Professor X, and a fellow Australian, I won't mention his name, he was the most imprudent person you ever met. He just did not know how to behave in practice. He had to consult everybody. Now, so that's prudence. These concern how we ought to behave. Art concerns how we ought to make. It concerns the product. A fellow might be a great artist, but very imprudent. A teacher might be wonderful at telling funny stories, but he might be imprudent, etc., etc. Now these are what are called the intellectual virtues. Now there are 4 others we call moral virtues. One of them concerns pleasurable things. Temperance. It concerns how to control ourselves with regard to pleasurable things. Don't make yourself sick by eating too much ice cream or something like that, or drinking too much beer. It concerns eaties and drinkies. Fortitude concerns difficult things. For instance, dogs love to have bones, but there's another dog there now. It'll take fortitude to get that bone from the other dog. Then finally, these are personal virtues. Then finally, there's justice. That concerns another, the rights of another. Jus in Latin, there's no J in Latin, jus, I-U-S, means right. It's giving to another what's due to him. What's due to him might be execution, but giving to another what's due to him. But all of these are in the abstract, nice and general. It takes another virtue to apply them in the singular. It's called prudence. So prudence is a moral virtue and an intellectual virtue at the same time. That's what education is, my friends. But how many in government in this state or this country could you trust with that kind of information today? Whether they measure up to it or not. How many? Very rare to find somebody, methinks. So, abortion, there's where the pro-life organizations fall down badly. They all argue from the humanity of the fetus. That's a correct argument, but it's a secondary argument. It's the only one they use. They should be arguing from the end. Bob and Betty, with sexual union, what's the end? New, live man. So anything which comes from between their activity and this production which deliberately rejects the end is gravely immoral. This is ethics now. I'm using it to illustrate a point. one of the girls, her name was Janet Black, in Canada. I mentioned that name, I shouldn't, I suppose, but you're not ever likely to meet Janet Black. I know why. She's dead. But Janet Black said to me in the classroom, "You'd be against contraception then." "That's correct." "Oh, that's silly," she said. No thought of principles. Total rejection of principles. But that is why the pro-life movement, as I've heard in my experience, reject the prime argument against abortion, because they're uncomfortable with rejecting contraception. See how an error in principle can cause a great error in the conclusion. Result: since they argue for the humanity of the fetus, I wrote a short paper proving, therefore, homosexuality is all right. Also published a paper, homosexual marriage is gravely immoral. About 10 or 12 pages or something it was, that paper. So the point about it is that we ought to operate from principles, proper principles. Arguing against this is what would stop all the argument that went on over the years about humanity of the fetus. When does the fetus become human? Right from the moment of conception. The best person on that, from my angle, is Dr. Diane Irving. She's a scientist and she's a philosopher. And she's taught medical ethics and has participated in big discussions in Rome, for instance. Wonderful woman. I've never met the woman, but many times we've spoken on the computer or on the telephone. So the question is, arguing from the end, that's the principle. Humanity of the fetus is sort of incidental to it. Nevertheless, it's a good argument. But the point is, then you land yourself in all this, you've got to prove it's human, and they're talking, the latest is that Diana is fighting the pre-embryo. What the heck is a pre-embryo? That's about as silly as saying the world created itself. Or what did I read once a physicist wrote? I thought this was terrific. I think I have it somewhere filed away, or did I hear it in a lecture? I can't remember. He said, once there was nothing, then from sheer necessity, being burst into existence. Try pulling the other leg, that one whistles. My story tonight, my friends, is to show that an error in principle leads to a great error in the conclusion. That's the point. And that is why marriages are annulled, by the way. When a couple come into marriage, like a girl said to me in class just the last year, I think I taught at Niagara University, "But what if they don't want children?" Well, this is my answer. Supposing I want you to paint my house, and I'm going to pay you, say, $1,000, $1,500, let's say. You don't intend painting my house, and I don't intend paying you. What sort of a contract is that? They're going into marriage, and that's what the ultimate end of marriage is, reproduction of the species. But nature's generous, and she puts intermediate goods too. Mutual love, mutual aid, and a natural remedy for concupiscence, in other words, sexual desire. A natural remedy for concupiscence. Once upon a time, we still teach it, it's still valid, we say that's the primary end, this is the secondary end. Oh, so the love with my wife is just secondary, is it? They'd say. Use the terms in the proper meaning. Primary means the ultimate, the main one, the one that's the ultimate one. It's the prime end. That's in the European meaning of the term. Secondary means it's not inferior, but it's another end which must minister to the ultimate end. So I found putting it this way, putting these there and then this after them is a much better way of putting it. So my friends, principles are everything. So the philosopher is above all a guardian of the principles of reason. I've got books. I've got one book that I admire the author very much. I don't remember seeing a principle in the book. I remember Woodbury used to say that you can read whole books of philosophy and not a word, not a principle in it. Not a principle of reason in it at all. And principles govern all our thinking. Like a fellow said to me, he said, this was a young engineering student in Montreal. Oh, philosophy's a lot of hogwash, he said. I wonder what sort of teachers he had. He said, engineering, we deal with practical things. He said, that table is there. So I analysed his sentence. That table is there. That table is not there. So you're saying, my friend, they're both the same statement. The supreme principle of all human reasoning and all philosophy, the supreme principle is nothing can be and not be at the same time under the same respect. That's in your pages on the principles, the 2 pages. I said, your engineering depends upon every statement you make involves a philosophical principle. Causality, identity, every statement you utter is based on philosophy, whether you like it or not. Well, I think we've said enough now about these matters. I want to do this more often, apply something to bring a point out, to make it easier for you. I presume you all got the new pages, or some of you did. How many don't have the new pages? 2 people. Is it that don't have a computer? Do you have a computer?
Yes.
Did you get the message?
No, I didn't check.
Okay, that's all right. There's only one without the new pages. Yeah. If somebody wants to give me a disc, I can put it on that for you.
What pages are you considering new? Because we have 2 sets.
Up to 30.
Up to 30.
21 to 30 I sent out. So, I just want to mention the most basic points which we've covered. The most basic. Remember the definition of philosophy. It explains the method, explains everything about it. Certain knowledge of all things through their ultimate causes in the light of the principles of reason. In the light of the principles of reason, there's the method. I have often said the basis of education, I published this by the way, the basis of education is prudence and wisdom. If you've got nothing else, these others all could be useful. But the student needs wisdom above all. I remember one man, Monsignor Clark, used to conduct in Australia very big pageantries, celebrating feast days and all sorts of things. Oh, glamour, 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 you know, people might be walking with candles and coloured lights and in the dark and all wonderful things, celebrating this and celebrating that. They're very good. On his deathbed, he said to a old schoolmate of mine, another priest, he said, I was wrong, you fellows were right. They were educating people. They were educating people. I just heard in the last few days in something that was on television, which I watch when I'm having supper or maybe having lunch, watch the news usually. But somebody defined education, no, what was it again? Life is a struggle between education and disaster. With education, you could lead a whole society astray. You can destroy civilization. That's why they say the philosopher has a tremendous responsibility, a tremendous burden. He must be aware of everything that scientists are doing and everybody else is doing. And even at the Catholic Academy of Sciences, one of the officers said, oh, a lot of people wouldn't regard philosophy as a science. Well, if it's not, my friend, neither is chemistry. It's more a science than the others are. But you see, they've got it all mixed up with test tubes. A fellow could be working in a laboratory for 100 years and never perform one act of science. He might be making discovery after discovery after discovery. And until he finds causes and makes a judgment, not just experimenting with tubes, test tubes. When he's experimenting, All he's doing is putting experience into that laboratory. Remember what the word experience means. It comes from the Latin experimentum. And in the French language, we use the term expérience, which means an experiment. The word experience in French means an experiment. And that's all an experiment is just concentrating an experience, controlling an experience here and now. The sort of thing that might happen naturally out there. They'll, even with earthquakes and things like that, they'll set up a laboratory to have things moving to see what happens to other things. So education is there and there, principally. Prudence in the practical order, wisdom in the speculative order. Speculative, the word speculative comes from speculum in Latin, meaning something, species. Species, your face. I'd say species. Vestra species in Latin, your face. Species means face, what you can see by looking at a thing. But speculative means the kind of looking at nature. Looking at nature. Practical, praxis in Greek, that's another thing. That's the practical order. That's the productive order, when you're doing something. So we speculate in order to do. But first comes the theoretical order, the speculative order. Now, my friends, let's take to the pages again. On page 6. No, 5. I'm having trouble with glasses. I distorted my other set and I'm using an old set. And I'm having a slight job here. To know something perfectly is to know it through its causes. And I gave you the definition of philosophy a few minutes ago. So the 4 causes, we saw them on page 6. We saw that formal cause and material cause are put together by Joe, by the efficient cause, in order to obtain the bust of Socrates. That's the final cause. The final cause is often called the cause of causes, causa causarum in Latin, the cause of causes, because it pulls all the other into operation. It draws them into operation. So the end is always principle in practical matters. If I'm going to Paris, I pack a bag for Paris, whatever the weather is there, and I buy a ticket for a plane to Paris. If I go to Sydney, Australia, around and say, when it's summer here, it's winter there. And I pack a lot of woolen clothes when I go there, because it's cold. No snow, thank goodness. But the end is principle in practical matters. So there we are. So, if you look at this with Socrates now, the bust of Socrates, it's first in the order of intention, but last in the order of practical things. Somewhere the Greeks, somebody says this, that they used to look at a block of marble and say, there's a statue in there, it's hidden in there and it's waiting to get out. So the fellow doing the chipping, etc., he's helping it to get out. It's a beautiful expression, I think. There's Socrates' faces in there somewhere, I'll let him out. Socrates was well known for having a snub nose. His nose went like that. And I was in the Louvre in Paris, and I went in there right near where the Venus de Milo is and the Mona Lisa, and I looked at this statue and I went over and I couldn't see any name on it. So I went and said to one of the guards who was chatting to a lady at a little confectionery stall there, and I said, what is the name of this statue, do you know? He said, oh, I don't know, let's go and have a look. So he went and sure enough, turned around, had it written in Greek, Socrates, which is Socrates in Greek. And I said, I thought so. But you could tell with a snub nose, he's well known for that. Now, if we turn to, I'm summarizing here just a little bit. I intended doing this tonight, particularly for some newcomers that didn't come. We saw the big problem was laid down by Parmenides and Heraclitus on page 9. Being and become, the one and the many. That change, how does change take place? My eyes tell me change is taking place, my nose, my ears, my touch. I know that there's change taking place out there. Just through touch and the weather alone, I know there are changes. This Christmas, I was in Australia with 100-degree temperature. I think it was over that, as a matter of fact, and swelteringly hot. When I got out at Buffalo Airport some few weeks later, it was just the other end of the spectrum. So there's a change. So they saw that. Then we saw that Aristotle, I'm going a bit far ahead, aren't I? Yes. We saw the problem as set up by Parmenides and Heraclitus. There it is at the top of page 10. What becomes is not. What is becomes not. One man solved the dilemma by denying his senses. That was Heraclitus, which is a big error. That's how you can remember it. The other one denied his intellect. That was Parmenides. And ever since, there have been philosophers who are one side or the other. For instance, Karl Marx would be on the side of Heraclitus. He followed his senses and made probably the most absurd philosophy in the history of the world. No one in all of history of philosophy made such a fool of himself as Karl Marx did. He had contradictions right, left, and centre. In fact, one man wrote a book just bringing out the contradictions. I have it somewhere. It was his doctoral thesis, although I don't think he got them all. So, men have become one or the other. But it took a giant like Aristotle to resolve the two. So then, we saw that other men made a big attempt, especially Plato, etc. And on page 14, we saw that they had solved this problem, or before that, I'm sorry, solved this problem by admitting that there are two principles, one which is changed and one which is not changed, one underlying one. The underlying one is called matter, the material cause. The overlying one that's changed from one to the other is called the form. So the form of cold left the water and the form of hot came into the water. Now it didn't jump out of the water. You don't see the coldness jumping out of anywhere. It recedes into the potency of the matter. And the heat is led out from the potency of the matter. Heating hot water. The coldness recedes, we call that, it's reduced into the potency, and the other's educed, led out from the potency of the water. So then, we saw on page 14 that the concept of being is analogous. There are 10 modes of being. You'll remember substance and 9 accidents. And those 10 modes of being, we call them modes, not kinds. Kinds means it's a genus. They're modes. They're only analogously alike. There's a certain likeness between colour and sound in this, that they both exist. If you don't think they both are existing things, try going to sleep one night with your neighbour with the radio turned up loud or something like that. So, they both exist. That's what they've got in common. Claude Lagadec, a classmate of mine, and André Dupont, another classmate, and I were having lunch in a little cafeteria somewhere in Montreal. It must have been a very cheap place. We could hardly afford to go out to any other places. And this is what they came up with. How can you prove the existence of a God? What's a stone got in common with God? Existence. That's what they've got in common, existence. We'll prove all this, by the way. Wait till we get into metaphysics. I'm soft pedaling just a little bit, knowing that they're probably our newcomers, so that we could give them a bit of a lift into the subject. They've both got existence. That's what they've got in common. And didn't Robinson Crusoe know that when he saw the footprint in the sand? Hello, somebody else exists besides me on this island. But the existence is analogous, which means they're alike, but more unlike. Remember, there are three ways a term can be used. It can be univocal, which is Latin for one voice. Or equivocal, which means they're only equal in voice. They sound alike. This means there's simply likeness. This means utter unlikeness. But when there's some likeness, but more unlikeness, we call that analogous. There's a likeness between them, but a greater unlikeness. What's an ant and an elephant got in common? They're both alike. There's greater unlikeness. So, what's the sound of a trumpet like? How's it compared with an elephant? They both exist. That's what they got in common. So, I found trouble when I came to North America first time in the English-speaking world. Anyway, the first time was entirely French, but the second time, well, almost entirely French. And when I was teaching students, they'd say about their aunt, is that the aunt that's married to your uncle, or is that the aunt that crawls up the wall, I'd say. Had a little trouble with that one. So being is analogous. And don't forget, on page 15, we've got the division of beings. I just want to focus on that just a little bit for a second. The essential division. Positive ones. Relation is a positive one. You can't see, that's an intellectual being. That's a mental being. A mental being is one whose whole be is bethinked. Bethought. Not walking out around there, but understood. It's an intellectual being, if you like. That's what the mental beings are. Relation, nearness. Say husband and wife. They're all relations. They're mental beings. You might see a woman, you might see a man. You don't see the relation of husband and wife. Husband and wife are relative terms. That means they've got a relation to each other, as you can readily see. So, they're positive ones. Man and sailor. There's a relation. Sometimes it's identified in one man. Sometimes it's not. Negative. A negative being, too. Now, I notice here something I needed to explain. Negation or privation. They must be understood. Who's got it? Where's the, oh, here it is. They got hiding on me. So, let me explain that.
What does BIB mean?
Which is that?
You just erased it. What does BIB mean?
I don't remember what I had there. What was it? I've forgotten what it was now.
It was right in the middle. Down.
I think that was Billy and Betty.
Oh, B and B.
Yeah,
Bob and Betty. Bob and Betty.
I can't hear.
Bob and Betty. Bob and Betty.
It's always a
A couple. That's just a simple way. I could use Murgatroyd Winterbottom if you like, but that's too hard for people taking notes. So, this is a negation. A tree is sightless. That's a negation. Bob is sightless. That's a privation. Sight isn't due to a tree. That's not part of a tree's nature, but is part of a man's nature. So it's deprived. Pardon me. They're both relations, but this one, the privation, is a special kind of relation. Excuse me. So you see, that just needs explaining there. Then we go on and give them some definitions of the things there. And notice how I emphasize the principle of non-contradiction down there on page 16. Being may be or not be. God cannot break that. He can break it even less than we can. Because he's more fully being and he's more divided away from non-being. Now, one person thought, when I said God cannot make a square circle, that I was decrying the value of, or the ability of God. God can do anything. Could God order, I've used this as an example in ethics, could God order Jacob to go and commit adultery? It'd be against divine justice. No, he cannot. That would be to go against his own nature. His own perfect nature, as we prove later. That'd go against the perfection of his nature. He's further divided from that than we are. He's further divided from these absurdities because he's got the fullness of being. Being and non-being are utterly contradictory. It's the basis of all human thinking, the principle of non-contradiction. But since God is more fully being than we are, he's further divided away from the absurd. And to say that he can't make a square circle, the square circle's not makeable. The square circle's not makeable. That's not saying anything against God. So think about that. And we saw this on page 17, about the middle of the page there. We saw the dilemma. Either cold water is, when you heat hot water, what happens? Does cold water pushed out of existence and hot water by some magic come into existence? Not at all. Water's common to both terms, as we call them. The terms, the terminal, you would say. There are two terminals to the action. This is very common in European languages. I ran into it when I first came to study there, saw how in Italy and in France and in French part of Canada, although the French are right across Canada, it's wrong to call it French Canada, but however, this is something, the students would say, quel est votre point de départ? What's your point of departure? Point of departure, point of arrival. In Latin and Italian, il punto di partire, point of departure. In other words, the two terms, they're both terminals. Think of it that way. In an action, there's always a starting point and a finishing point. Well, here we've got the point of departure is cold water, the point of arrival is hot water. So either that happens or the water is common to both. Well, how you can put cold water out of existence or hot water, bring it into existence, I don't know. When I was about 13, we started to study chemistry. I think at 12 or 13, I've forgotten now. We started to study chemistry. That was 105 years ago. And we were taught that it's impossible, and we did an experiment to prove it, impossible to destroy matter. You can change it, but you cannot destroy it. We'll try bringing matter into existence. That's a little more difficult. You know, when I was in pharmacy, we used to say, the difficult takes a little time, the impossible takes a little longer. So on page 18, we see that there are two principles governing all beings. Act and potency. Act and potency. In the order of bodies, which is a special kind of being, to us it sounds that bodies are the only kind, but it's form and matter. So there's a relationship. Act is to potency as form is to matter. Form is whatever inner thing fixes it to be what it is. It tricks a lot of people, that. If you can fix that in your minds, it'll help you. Form is whatever inner thing fixes it to be what it is. Now, how many ways can something be fixed to be what it is? Anybody going to answer that question?
One,
How's that?
because you can only, I don't know.
That's what Socrates would have called an honest man. He says, how many ways can something be a fixing thing? How many kinds of forms are there? But
As many as there are material things?
10
Oh,
substantial form and 9 accidental forms. That's why we call them modes.
yes.
Modes because they're only alike. If they were belong to the same species or genus, we'd call them kinds. But since they're only analogously alike, we call them modes.
Are you saying M-O-D-E-S?
M-O-D-E-S. Modes.
Oh, okay.
You know? So, my friends, the distinction. Now, on page 19, we saw the distinction being brought out, the evidence of the distinction. Let's stop there for a little break and a cup of coffee.